"You're useless and idiot, old man." My son's voice cracked through the living room like thunder splitting the night. The air went still. Even the ticking clock on the wall seemed afraid to make another sound. I stood near the doorway, my hand still on the knob, my old leather bag hanging by a thread from my shoulder. The same bag I carried to work every morning for 35 years, faded brown, with the initials I carved into it when I was young and proud. Now it looked out of place in this polished house, full of chrome furniture and glass walls. He stood there, tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in a designer hoodie that probably cost more than my entire month's groceries. His friends, 2 of them, leaned against the counter, silent, half smiling, half scared. They didn't expect a scene like this. They expected laughter, maybe a quick argument, not a storm breaking open between blood. My son crossed his arms. "You don't get it, Dad. This is my house now, my life. You don't belong here anymore." He said it like he was throwing out an old chair. I watched the words leave his mouth and vanish into the space between us, space that used to be filled with shared dinners, quiet jokes, and Sunday football games. I said nothing. Not because I didn't want to, but because I had already said everything that mattered over the years. When he was 10, I told him the value of patience. When he was 15, I told him pride destroys before it builds. When he was 20, I told him respect is the only currency that never loses value. And tonight I realized he had spent it all. He grabbed the old frame from the mantel, the photo of him at graduation, my hand on his shoulder, and tossed it into a box. Glass shattered. The sound echoed through the hallway. "You don't pay bills, you don't cook, you don't even know how to use a phone properly," he snapped. "You're just old." The word old hung in the air like a curse. I could feel the shame tightening in my chest, but not because of what he said, because of how lost he sounded saying it. The boy I raised was buried somewhere beneath that arrogance, suffocating under expectations he didn't understand. He moved toward me again. I said, "Leave." His voice trembled. His hands didn't. He wanted control, but fear was starting to bleed through his anger. I glanced around the house one more time. Every wall, every light fixture, every piece of furniture. I remembered building the porch with my own 2 hands, painting the walls with his mother's favorite shade of cream. Every memory in this house had my fingerprints on it. But he couldn't see any of it. Pride had blinded him. I bent down slowly, picked up one of my shirts from the box, folded it neatly and placed it back inside. He watched me confused, like he expected shouting, cursing, something dramatic. Instead, I gave him silence, the kind that makes people uncomfortable, the kind that says more than anger ever could. He slammed the front door open. Cold evening air rushed in. "Out," he said. That word hit harder than a slap. For a brief moment, I saw the child he used to be. The boy who ran into my arms when he fell off his bike. The boy who cried when I missed his school play. Now his eyes were hard, glassy, unrecognizable. I picked up my bag, adjusted my hat and stepped forward. When I crossed the doorway, it felt like walking out of my own skin. The porch lights glowed behind me. The laughter of his friends filled the silence I left behind. I didn't turn around, not once, because sometimes dignity is measured by how quietly you walk away. The street was dimly lit, leaves scraping the sidewalk. A cat darted across the road. Some neighbors peeked through their blinds, not out of concern but curiosity. In their eyes, I was just another old man leaving his son's house after an argument. But they didn't know the truth. They didn't know who really owned that house. I reached the corner and paused. My knees ached, my fingers stiff in the night air, but my mind was clear, painfully clear. He thought he had taken everything. He didn't know that the deed still had my name printed in bold letters. He didn't know I never transferred ownership after his mother passed. He didn't even remember that the mortgage payment still came from my pension account. He believed he'd kicked me out. But all he'd really done was show me how far he'd fallen from the values I taught him. I looked back once, not at the door, not at him, but at the glowing windows. For a moment, I whispered softly to the night, "You'll learn, son. Pride has a price and it always gets paid in full." Then I walked away, the street swallowing my footsteps, and the story of a father's silence began to write its next chapter, the one that would remind his son who the real owner of everything truly was. When I left that night, I had nowhere particular to go, but a man who's built his own roof from scratch doesn't fear the rain. I walked down the long stretch of street, the same one I used to drive him to school on. I remembered him sitting beside me, backpack half open, his tiny fingers clutching a lunch I'd packed too early in the morning. Now that same road felt endless, cold, lonely, silent. The city lights flickered in puddles left by a light drizzle. Every sound seemed sharper. The hum of tires, the echo of laughter from strangers, the distant bark of a dog. It's funny how when you lose your place in one house, the whole world starts to feel unfamiliar. I spent that first night at a small motel near the edge of town. It wasn't much, just a bed, a table, and a smell of old carpet. But it was quiet. And quiet was all I needed. I didn't sleep right away. Instead, I sat by the window staring at the phone. My fingers hovered over his number more than once. But I never pressed call, because sometimes a father's silence hurts more than 1,000 words. I thought about my late wife, how she used to sit by that same window years ago, telling me our boy had a spark, a mind too big for small dreams. She believed in him. So did I. Maybe that was the problem. We believed too much and he believed too little in what mattered. Days passed. I started spending my mornings at the park, sitting on the same bench where I used to feed pigeons when he was a child. People walked by. Young couples, joggers, men in suits rushing to offices they hated. I watched them and thought, everyone's running towards something or away from it. Me, I was standing still. And sometimes stillness is the only strength you have left. A week went by before I got my first call from the real estate office. They said my name still appeared on several properties I had invested in years ago. They wanted to confirm if I was still maintaining them. I smiled. I'd almost forgotten how much I'd quietly built in the shadows of my working years. I had always believed in preparing for storms, even the ones I couldn't see coming. And it turned out I had built more than a house. I had built a foundation no one could take from me. That evening I called my lawyer, a calm, soft-spoken man who had handled my wife's estate years ago. He sounded surprised to hear from me. "Mr. Johnson," he said, "it's been a while. What can I do for you?" "Nothing yet," I told him. "Just check something for me." "The house? It's still under my name, right?" He shuffled through papers, then replied, "Yes, sir. You never transferred it." "Not legally." I leaned back in my chair, eyes half closed. "Good," I said quietly. "I just wanted to be sure." When I hung up, the night felt different. Still cold, but no longer heavy. I knew the truth, and the truth has its own quiet warmth. Another week passed. I didn't visit my son, didn't call, didn't ask if he was okay. But I knew the kind of man he was, prideful, impulsive, loud. He probably thought he was living his best life, throwing parties, bragging about ownership, showing off. But arrogance burns fast. And time is the wind. One morning I walked past a small diner near the highway. Through the glass I saw him, my son, laughing loudly, surrounded by the same friends who once stood silent as he humiliated me. He looked carefree, unaware that the ground he stood on wasn't his. I didn't go in. I just watched for a moment, long enough to see his smile fade for a second, like his conscience was tugging at him, whispering what he refused to hear. I walked away before he saw me. Not because I was afraid, but because I didn't want pity to poison my lesson. That night the phone rang. It was the lawyer again. He said he'd received a notice about unpaid property tax. My son hadn't paid a dime since I left. I told him, "Leave it as it is. Let the notice reach the house." He hesitated. "Are you sure, Mr. Johnson?" "Yes," I said slowly. "Sometimes the only way to teach a man the value of something is to let him lose it." When I hung up, I stood by the window again. Rain pattered against the glass. The city beyond was quiet. I thought of my son's face when that letter arrived, the arrogance turning into confusion, the confusion turning into fear. I whispered softly to myself, "You called me useless, son, but soon you'll learn who kept you standing." Outside, the world kept moving, but inside that small motel room, time paused, as a father's silence slowly turned into justice waiting to speak. The morning the letter arrived, the air in that house shifted. Even from a distance, I could feel it. There's something strange about justice. It doesn't need to shout. It just arrives quietly in an envelope. It was a bright Saturday, the kind of day the city hums lazily. But at that house, the house my hands had built, my sweat had paid for, there was noise, music, laughter, the same crowd that cheered when my son threw me out. They were still there, drinking from cups I bought, sitting on chairs I carved, walking on floors I'd polished myself. But all that laughter stopped when the mailman came. The letter was plain. No fancy stamps, no warning on the outside, just my name at the top as the legal owner, and beneath it, bold words that could slice through arrogance like a knife. Notice of tax default, property subject to legal claim if payment is not settled. My son held the paper, reading it twice, maybe 3 times. At first he laughed, thinking it was a mistake. He called one of his friends over. They looked at the notice, their voices low and uncertain. "Maybe it's your dad's old address," one said. My son shrugged, but the truth was already in the pit of his stomach. He picked up his phone and dialed. First he called me. I saw his name flash on the screen. I let it ring. And ring and ring! Then stop, he called again. This time I muted it and watched the call die in silence. He sent a message. "Dad, there's a letter about the house. I think they made a mistake." I didn't reply. Minutes later, another message came. "Can we talk?" Still, I stayed quiet. That silence, oh, that silence, was years of humiliation, disappointment, and heartbreak condensed into peace. For the first time in years, silence was on my side. By evening, he drove to the real estate office. They told him the truth, politely, professionally, that the legal owner of the property was still me, that no transfer had ever been made, that without my written approval, he couldn't even pay the taxes. I wish I could have seen his face. They said he just stood there, eyes wide, hands trembling slightly, as if the world he built out of arrogance had started to crumble brick by brick. He called again that night. This time his voice was lower, softer, almost respectful. "Dad, can we talk? I didn't know things were like this." I could have answered. I could have said, "Now you know," but I didn't. Some lessons die when spoken. They live only in silence. Instead, I turned off the phone, placed it on the table beside the old photo of him as a child. He was 5 in that picture, smiling, holding a wooden toy I'd carved. He used to think I could fix anything. Now the only thing broken was his pride. 2 days later, I heard from a neighbor who still lived near the house. She said my son hadn't come out in a while, that the music had stopped, that some of the friends who once cheered him on had stopped visiting. Because when a man's wealth turns out to be borrowed, the crowd disappears faster than the music fades. I walked past the house once, early in the morning. The curtains were closed. The porch light flickered weakly, a sign of decay, both in the bulb and in the soul that lived beneath that roof. I didn't go near the gate. Didn't need to. Just seeing it from across the street was enough to feel a strange peace rising inside me, because justice doesn't always come with fire or fury. Sometimes it comes with quiet footsteps, carrying an envelope with your name still written proudly at the top. That night, as I sat by my window again, a storm began to roll in. The wind howled, lightning cracked open the sky, and thunder rattled the glass. But instead of fear, I felt calm, because for once the storm wasn't mine. It belonged to him, and this time he'd have to weather it alone. The silence after that letter wasn't peace anymore. It was punishment, and it stretched across days like fog, creeping into every corner of my son's once loud house. At first he tried to keep up appearances. He'd still invite friends over, still play the music, still wear that golden chain I bought him years ago when he graduated. He'd smile, pretending everything was fine. But every time someone mentioned the house, his jaw tightened and his eyes shifted away. He started avoiding calls from the bank. Then from the real estate agent. Then from the car company. One morning I saw his name flash across the news feed. Young entrepreneur faces property ownership dispute. The same people who once posted his pictures online, laughing, drinking, calling him a man of success, now whispered behind his back. Even his so-called friends, the ones who had cheered when he called me useless, started leaving. They stopped showing up at his parties. They stopped answering his calls. Arrogance has a short guest list. Loyalty leaves the moment the lights go out. Meanwhile, I stayed quiet. I didn't gloat, didn't celebrate. I just kept to my little apartment, the one with old furniture, soft jazz on the radio, and pictures of a boy I once loved more than my own comfort. Sometimes, I'd sit with a cup of coffee by the window, watch the rain slide down the glass, and think about how time humbles everyone, especially those who mock it. Then came the day he showed up at my workplace. Yes, my workplace. Because despite my age, I still worked. Not because I had to, but because work kept me grounded. It reminded me who I was before pride got tangled in the idea of fatherhood. He walked in wearing a wrinkled shirt, no smile, no arrogance. Just exhaustion. There were circles under his eyes, and that sharpness in his voice, the one that once dripped with contempt, was gone. He stood near the doorway, unsure whether to come closer. "Dad," he said softly, "can we talk?" The office went quiet. My co-workers looked up. Everyone knew what had happened. Small towns have long ears. I didn't move. Didn't speak. Just looked at him, not with anger, not even with pity, but with distance. He took a deep breath. "I didn't know the house was still in your name." "I thought—" He paused. "I thought you'd given it to me." I nodded once. "That's what you thought." He swallowed hard. His hands trembled. "Dad, I'm sorry for what I said that night. I was drunk. I didn't mean it. But apologies made after comfort is gone carry no weight, they're just echoes. Son," I said quietly, "you didn't call me useless because you were drunk. You called me useless because you believed it." He flinched as if those words hit harder than any slap. "I've been trying to fix things," he said, desperate. "The mortgage, the bank, everything. But they won't talk to me without you. I need your signature, Dad, please, just this once." There it was, the same tone he used as a child when asking for candy. But now it wasn't candy he wanted. It was control. I leaned back in my chair, folded my hands, and watched him. There was a time I would have said yes immediately. But that time had died the night he threw me out like I was luggage too old for his new lifestyle. "Do you remember what you said?" I asked. He hesitated. "Dad, please don't—" "Say it," I interrupted softly. His eyes welled up, but I stayed calm. "You said you're useless and idiot, old man, didn't you?" He nodded slowly, shame dripping from his expression. "Well," I said, "now you'll learn what a useless old man can do when he stops helping." He opened his mouth, but no words came out. "You thought I needed you," I continued. "But the truth, son, is that everything you had, your house, your car, even the job interview you bragged about, came from me." I paused, letting the weight of that truth fill the room. "Every time you mocked me, you forgot who built your foundation. You were laughing on the roof while I was still holding up the walls." He wiped his face, struggling to speak. "I know, Dad, I was wrong. Please just give me a chance to make it right." I looked away toward the window, where the sunlight hit the glass in broken streaks. "Life already gave you a chance," I said. "You used it to humiliate me." And with that I stood up, gathered my files, and walked past him. He tried to grab my arm, but I pulled away gently. The same hand that once held his when he was scared of the dark now slipped free from his grip without a tremor. As I walked out, I heard his voice behind me, softer, broken. "Dad, please, I don't have anywhere else to go." I stopped for a moment at the door. Didn't turn around. Didn't offer comfort. Because sometimes mercy ruins the lesson. Outside the wind was calm, the world still, and for the first time in years, I felt lighter. Not because I'd won, but because I'd finally let go of something that no longer respected me. Behind me, inside that office, my son stood alone. He'd come to claim what wasn't his, and left realizing he'd already lost more than any property could replace. And as I walked down that street, head high, heart steady, I whispered a quiet truth only time could understand. Respect isn't inherited, son. It's earned, and you spent yours too fast. After that day at the office, the air between us turned colder than winter. He stopped calling, stopped showing up, but I knew the storm wasn't over. It was just gathering strength behind closed doors. A week later, I heard from one of my old friends, who still worked at the bank. He said quietly, "Your boy's in trouble. They froze his accounts. I didn't ask for details." Didn't need to. Every decision he'd made, every insult he'd thrown, was now circling back like a storm he thought would never reach his doorstep. They say karma whispers, but this time, Fayette roared. I started noticing the signs everywhere. His car, the same black sedan he loved showing off, was parked crooked near a pawn shop one day, gone the next. The lights in his house, my house, started going off earlier each night. The once green lawn grew wild. Neighbors stopped visiting. Even the laughter of his friends had vanished. The world has a strange way of humbling those who forget where they came from. One afternoon, while I was finishing up work, my phone buzzed. A message from him. "Dad, can we talk?" For a long while I just stared at the screen. My thumb hovered over the phone, but I didn't reply. Because I'd learned, not every cry deserves an answer. The next evening I saw him waiting near my apartment. He looked hollow. The sharp lines of arrogance on his face had softened into something weary. Dark circles framed his eyes, and his once perfectly groomed beard had grown rough, uneven. He was wearing the same jacket from last winter, torn at the elbow. "Dad," he said quietly, stepping forward. "Please, and I just need to talk." I didn't move. Didn't open the door wider. Just stood there, letting him see what silence looked like. He swallowed hard, voice trembling. "They're taking the house, the bank, the cars, everything. I don't know what to do anymore." His eyes darted around, looking for sympathy, but I kept mine steady. He went on. "I tried to fix it, Dad, I really did. I called everyone, but nobody picks up. Not even my friends," I nodded slowly. "That's because they were never your friends, son," I said softly. "They were your audience." And the show ended. He looked like he'd been punched in the chest. Tears filled his eyes, but he didn't let them fall. Not yet. Pride still held on, weakly, desperately. "I messed up," he whispered. "I shouldn't have said those things to you. I shouldn't have kicked you out." For the first time in a long while, I stepped outside, standing right in front of him. He looked smaller now, like the weight of his choices had pressed him into the ground. "Do you remember what I said that night?" I asked. He nodded slowly. "You said respect isn't inherited." I nodded back. "And now you understand why?" He looked down at his shoes, the same expensive sneakers he'd once mocked me for not affording. The edges were frayed. Even the shine was gone. "Dad," he said again, voice cracking, "I don't have anywhere to go." The words hung in the cold air, fragile and heavy. I thought about all the nights I sat outside that same house he'd thrown me out of, waiting for him to open the door. He never did. And now here he was, standing in the same kind of darkness, asking for light. "Life's funny like that," I said quietly. "Fad gives you a mirror when you least expect it." He started crying then, not loudly, but in that silent, shaking way a man does when he's finally broken. He covered his face with his hands, shoulders trembling, and I just stood there watching. Not out of cruelty, but because pain is sometimes the only teacher that sticks. "I can't do this anymore," he said between sobs. "I lost everything, Dad. I don't even have a place to sleep tonight." I took a deep breath, felt the ache in my chest, not from anger, but from something deeper. A part of me wanted to take him in, offer him warmth, food, a place to rest. But another part remembered that every time I offered those same things before, he traded them for pride. "I warned you," I said softly. "You can't build a future on disrespect." He lifted his head, eyes red, face streaked with tears. "I know that now," he whispered. "Please, I'll do anything. Just, please help me this once." I didn't answer. Instead, I turned toward the door. The same way he once did. I felt his hand brush against my sleeve, weakly. "Dad, please," he said again, barely above a whisper. I looked back, not at the son I raised, but at the man who had to lose everything just to understand one truth. Pride feeds fast, but respect, that takes years to grow. "I can't help you right now," I said finally. "You need to learn what you took for granted." He froze, tears streaming silently. Then quietly I closed the door, not out of hate, but out of love that had finally learned boundaries. Behind that door I could hear him breathing, heavy, broken. Then nothing, only the sound of the wind outside, carrying away everything that used to be his comfort. Inside I sat down, looked around the small apartment I'd learned to call home again. It wasn't grand, but it was mine. And more than anything, and it was peaceful. For the first time I realized something. He hadn't just lost a house. He'd lost the one person who ever kept his world from falling apart. And as the night deepened, I whispered a quiet prayer. Not for his success, but for his humility. Because maybe in that emptiness he'd finally find himself. It's strange how silence can feel louder than shouting. The morning after I closed that door, the world outside seemed still, like even the wind was holding its breath. I didn't sleep that night. I sat by the window, the soft hum of the city in the distance, the glow of the streetlight washing over my hands. Hands that had built everything he had. Hands that once carried him when he was small enough to fit between my arms and my heart. Now those same hands had locked him out. For years I told myself that being a father meant forgiving, no matter what. But forgiveness without respect is just surrender, and I was done surrendering. By morning I got a call. From the property office. The lady said, Mr. Thompson, the final transfer went through. The house is officially back in your name. I thanked her and hung up. No joy, no excitement, just quiet relief. Later that afternoon, I took a slow walk toward that house. The one where everything fell apart. The one where he screamed at me, called me useless, called me an idiot, told me to leave. The neighborhood was quieter now. No cars in the driveway. The paint on the porch chipped, the garden wild with weeds. The laughter that used to echo through those walls had been replaced by a deep, aching emptiness. I stood there for a long while, staring at it, not with anger, but with memory. Every nail, every brick, every corner had a piece of me in it, and now it was mine again, not through revenge, through endurance. As I stood there, I heard footsteps behind me, slow, hesitant, familiar. He was there, my son, clothes wrinkled, hair messy, eyes bloodshot. He looked thinner, older, like life had taken a piece out of him. He stopped a few feet away, clutching a small bag. I didn't say a word. He opened his mouth, voice hoarse. "I've been sleeping in my car, Dad." I nodded once, not out of surprise. I already knew. This town talks, and word spreads fast when a man who once bragged about wealth is seen eating alone at gas stations. "I tried to find a job," he said quietly, "but no one will hire me. Not after what happened." He swallowed, hands trembling. "The bank." "The papers. I didn't know everything was still in your name." I looked at him, calm as stone. "You never asked," I said. "You just assumed I was done." He nodded slowly. "Yeah," he whispered. "I did." The wind picked up, brushing dust across the road between us. For a moment it felt like all those years of distance were swirling there too, between father and son. "I wanted to apologize," he said, his voice breaking. "Not to get anything back, just to say I was wrong." He looked down. "I thought money made me a man. But it was you. You made me one. I just didn't see it until it was too late." He started crying then, not like before, not desperate or begging, and just quiet tears of regret. The kind that come when you finally realize the damage you can't undo. And I let him cry. Because sometimes that's all that's left. "I'm sorry," he whispered, "for everything." I took a deep breath, felt the ache rise in my chest. For a second I saw him not as the man who threw me out, but as the little boy who once ran into my arms after scraping his knee. Time changes faces, but it never erases moments. "You've learned your lesson," I said softly. "Now you'll have to live with it." He nodded slowly, wiping his eyes. "I understand." I looked at him for a long time, really looked at him, and then said, "Go find your own way, son." The same way I had to. "This house isn't where you'll find peace anymore." He turned his head slightly, his lips trembling. "I know," he said. "I just wanted to see you one last time." Then he turned and started walking down that empty street. No car, no money, no pride. Just a man walking away from everything he destroyed with his own hands. And me? I stood there on that porch, the morning sun brushing against my face. For the first time in years, I didn't feel small or broken. I felt whole because dignity doesn't live in houses. It lives in choices. And I had finally made mine. I unlocked the front door, my door, and stepped inside. The air smelled of dust and old memories. I walked through the living room, ran my hand across the table, felt the grain of the wood I once sanded myself. This was mine again, not because I took it back, but because I never truly lost it. I sat down in the same old chair by the window. The light poured in, warm and quiet. I closed my eyes and whispered to myself, "Respect isn't something you demand. It's what remains after the world forgets your name." And in that moment I realized I didn't need revenge. I didn't need him to suffer. Life had already handled that part. All I needed was peace.